Hey friends, hoping you're having a great Monday morning. I just want to take just a few moments and just unpack a few things about the text that we studied this weekend in our series, Postcards from the Edge. We looked at Revelation chapter 2, verses 18 to 29, and this was to the church at Thyatira, a really challenging letter in reading it. And I'll be honest, my first response when I read the letter, well, at first, the first couple of verses, I thought, hey, no big deal. And then when I saw what the complaint was, and then what Jesus was going to do as a result of this, I had much fear and trepidation. But my hope is through this weekend that we actually journeyed from what seemed to be a really heavy passage into discovering some beautiful life there. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but I want to take a couple of moments and just walk through the passage. I'm not going to read it all because it's the longest of these letters. It's the most challenging probably of these from a subject matter. It is the harshest in tone, and it's also to the most obscure of cities. So there's a lot of challenges, but there's some really interesting things in this, and us among us, I guess I'd say, who are the Bible nerds. There's a few hidden gems in there that I didn't talk about this weekend because I just didn't have time. I wanted to get to the meat of the message, but I'm going to try to point you in the right direction around some of those things. The most important thing I want to point out just at the very beginning is this. It starts out the same way as all the others, to the angel of the church. But what's really interesting is there's three things that I want to point out. The first one in this first verse right here where it says, the words of the Son of God. This is really unique because this is the first, this is really the only place here where it talks about this in Revelation. It's used in other places, but Jesus is referring to himself as the Son of God. And that's really interesting because in first century Thyatira, it was a very syncretistic society. They took religious beliefs from a variety of different religious perspectives, but also many of the leaders in the day, they were called sons of God. And as a matter of fact, you might think Caesar was referred to as Son of God or as God. Many people saw Caesar as a deity. And so what's interesting is Jesus is identifying himself as above all of those, who also has what? Eyes like a flame of fire. This comes from Daniel, I believe Daniel chapter 7, where Daniel sees this vision of a coming figure to come. We would say that's Jesus who Daniel saw. And then the last thing here under this, whose feet are like what? Burnished bronze, which would have stuck out to first century readers in Thyatira because Thyatira was known so much for their bronze smithing. So he really was rooting an Old Testament paradigm. He was comparing culturally Son of God and burnished bronze to get their attention and meet them where they were, but also to say, look, I'm the one who's got authority, right? So he's starting from that place of he's the one that's got authority as he moves forward. I love verse 19. I think this is a beautiful verse because it's acknowledging on Jesus' behalf that this church, it was their love and faith. This is really what they were doing. It was their love and faith and the outworking of that was their service and their endurance. And it was basically saying their latter works exceed the first. Other translations would say you're continuing to grow in this. So these things were good about the church, and they were taking steps to continue to grow. But then the complaint, Jezebel. And I just want to point out, it's in 1 Kings, if you want to dig into this, 1 and 2 Kings. We see the story of Jezebel. She was Ahab's wife, and he had led his nation, and she had led the entire nation to turn from God and to worship Baal. And so this name Jezebel is not really probably this person's name, but she's sort of a type of Jezebel from the Old Testament that you can read about what Jezebel did there. Her teaching seduced these people to practice sexual immorality and to eat food sacrificed to idols. And we talked about this weekend how because of the Gnostic belief that our bodies and our spirits were separate, she was able to convince people that it was okay for them to fully engage in what was happening in these trade guilds in Thyatira because it was just their bodies. It didn't have to be their hearts, which is very, very dangerous. The church has called that heresy. The Gnostic idea, Gnosticism, is a heresy. I love here, verse 21, we see Jesus just reminding us that he's patient, but he gave her time, but she refused to repent. And then it's really harsh. This is hard because when you look at it, you kind of go, wow, this is way over the top. compared to other language we see from Jesus, but I think it's because he's so committed to his church being a voice for hope and for people being pulled toward wholeness that he's not willing to get rid of that. So I think this is largely figurative, but really where it says here, verse 23, I will strike her children dead. He's not literally saying that she had children. He's saying that the fruit of her labor, the sin, basically, I'm going to put an end to all of this. Why? Because all the churches will know that I'm he who searches the mind and heart, and I'll give each of you according to your works. It sounds a little bit scary. I don't think it's scary. I think it's largely metaphor. But it is conveying the truth that he's going to put an end to these deeds because he's not willing to let his church go to ruin because of this. Then he goes into verse 24 and on here where he's giving a little bit of a promise. But I want to point out just an interesting thing here. This kind of sticks out, right? Deep things of Satan. So he's saying, if you don't hold on to this teaching, if you have not learned what some call the deep things of Satan, to you I say, I'm not going to lay on you any other burden, meaning I'm not going to hold this over you. What does that mean, the deep things of Satan? Well, a lot of commentators believe that many first century people in Thyatira and in other cultures who are syncretistic, they would allure people and go, I have special knowledge that no one else has. It's the deep things of Satan. It's the things that I've learned from Satan. But the truth was that was marketing tactic. It was a lie. It wasn't from Satan. These were the truths of God being attributed to Satan. And often they were distorted, right? Which meant these are the deep truths of Satan. They were a distortion of God's truth. And so he's saying to these people, you're not buying into the lie about the supposed deep things of Satan. It's just simply not true. He encourages them to hold fast until he comes. And then the last thing I just want to point out, which is really fascinating to me, is this right here, verses 26 and 27. This is really from Psalm chapter 2. This is a quote almost exactly from Psalm chapter 2. And it's a messianic psalm. It's a psalm that sort of foreshadows a coming Messiah. And so he's basically saying, he's using this familiar Jewish scripture to help people see that he has the authority. And the same authority that he has, he's going to give to those who hold firm to rule and reign with him. It sounds a little bit harsh when you see things like rule them with a rod of iron, when earth pots are broken in pieces. But he's essentially not saying, I'm going to be this tyrannical, awful ruler. He's saying all authority under heaven and earth has been given to me, and to those who hold firm, I'm going to do that. And then this is also an Old Testament picture. I'll give him the morning star, which ultimately we believe that to be Jesus. Just real quick, how to exegete this passage. I'm just showing you a few things that are really interesting for the Bible nerds among us. But it all comes back to this. This verse 19, he praises them, and then he breaks into this. And the passages that's so easy to sort of see, the words that I guess we would say are people to practice sexual immorality and eat food sacrificed to idols. Those things are a problem. But in my read of this, they're symptomatic of this. This word right here. I have this against you, that you tolerate that woman Jezebel. That's what he has against them, that they tolerate this woman Jezebel. And what does she do? She claims this authority. She teaches people. She leads them astray to do things that would help them to fit in. And so I think because of that, because of what was at stake was the health of his church and the health of his people, we move down into what looks like very heavy-handed intervention. I think it's really interesting, though, he doesn't threaten the church. He's not attacking the church. He's attacking their tolerance, but he doesn't come back and nail them to the wall. He's nailing Jezebel to the wall for what she's doing to his people. So I think as we're looking at this passage, we've got to be really careful to look at phrases like this, that I have against you. We don't just jump down to these words that are big words and seem heavy. Those are real symptoms. We have to look at what's really going on, and that's right here, that they're tolerating this leader. And as we talked about this weekend, the big idea is that Jesus is fiercely committed to the wholeness of his people and the influence of his church, and Jesus was not willing to allow their tolerance of Jezebel to destroy both the people of the church by allowing them to get into things that weren't good for them, or to destroy the voice of the church by allowing them to be just like culture. Those are some takeaways from this passage. It's a long passage, but it's really fascinating. And I hope that you enjoy digging into this and reading about this. I love that there's some tiebacks and some pictures from the Old Testament. And I love ultimately that we see Jesus not turning his back on this happening and protecting the church and ultimately protecting the gospel so that people can be pulled toward wholeness.